Thank you very much for being here tonight on a Monday evening. I was not expecting this many people to show up on a Monday, so thank you very much for coming. So I want to start off by explaining, why did I write this book about the woman of the far right? So I started writing this book in 2019 around the decline of the so-called alt-right in the US, which helped to propel Trump's election and presidency, we can say first presidency. And there was so much attention being placed on men within the alt-right, by media, even by some scholars. And I knew that there was some very prominent women within this movement, but they weren't being seen to be taken seriously in terms of their activism in this space. So that's when I decided I wanted to focus on these women, but I was also very curious as to, like their male commentators, they were posting YouTube videos about political commentary and reacting to current events. But they were also posting about cooking dinner for their families and gardening with their children. And I wanted to understand, why were these women choosing to showcase a more holistic picture of themselves online? And what I found was that, based on 3 years of research, that far-right women are playing key roles, not a singular role, but they're playing key roles as propagandists, organizers, fundraisers, and entrepreneurs. And I'll show you how they do so in the presentation. Now, these North American women who I focus on, and I do focus on some examples in Europe as well, which I'll get to, they engage in a political activism that focuses on culture war issues. So think about things like wokeness or gender ideology, these very hot topic issues. And for these far-right women, they focus on these very specific culture war issues because they hope that they can change public consciousness on these social and cultural issues. That is, they hope that they can sort of change mainstream conversations about things like gender and immigration towards achieving what they hope to be their far-right utopia. And the key takeaway I'd like you to walk away with, if you're going to leave, but please don't, is that far-right women play a key function within this movement that is very different from their male counterparts. And they normalize and legitimize far-right ideology for mainstream appeal. And I'll show you through several examples how they do this. I'll guide you through the examples on the slide in just a minute. But to start off, I call these women influencers because they serve as leading online personalities that are helping to shape and popularize ideas within the far right. And they rely on practices derived from influencer culture. So when we think about influencers, we might think about them just in terms of individuals on social media. But there's actually quite a lot of research looking into how influencers have their own particular type of culture, the way that they present themselves online, the way that they build relationships with their followers. And for these far-right women that I've studied, they display the way they live their politics as an aspirational brand. By that I mean that they merge their political ideology with their personal lifestyle into one, so that they become an easily recognizable persona in this online space. And I argue that these influencers, they use what I call networked intimacy techniques to build and maintain their personal brands, so their followers feel like they know and intimately feel close to these influencers. They're part of their everyday lives. Now I'll guide you through the examples on the screen. The top is a screenshot from the YouTube channel of Brittany Zellner, née Pettibone. She's married to Martin Zellner, the leader of the Austrian branch of the identitarian movement. Now, the title of this video, 3 Reasons Marriage is a Risk and Why We Still Took It. It's a video of them on their honeymoon, and they are talking about how wonderful their wedding was in terms of how many friends and family came to celebrate with them. And they're sitting off of the beach on the Mediterranean Sea, drinking cafe lattes, talking about now how wonderful their honeymoon is. Now, I did not broadcast my honeymoon onto the internet. I don't think many people do. But in this way, they start talking about how the personal decision to get married is for them an act of political rebellion. They claim that society is anti-marriage, anti-traditional nuclear family, and them getting married and wanting to start a family is an act of political resistance against mainstream liberalism. Of course, you can also see in the description that Brittany links where you can go to her Instagram page to see the photo album from the wedding, as well as buy her book, an audiobook. On the bottom left-hand side, this is an Instagram story from Thais de Scoufon. She was a former spokesperson for the French branch of the identitarian movement before it was banned by the government in 2021. To this day, she still remains an independent content creator on her own channels. And here we can see in that Instagram story that she's showing editing of an upcoming YouTube video for her channel. You can see she uses the countdown sticker, so that way her followers can be automatically notified when that YouTube video is released onto her channel. Now, before this, we often saw brands and corporations use things like countdown stickers and PR and marketing to get audiences excited about forthcoming content they would release for their brand. In this case, what I was seeing was how these influencers were shaping the brand as themselves. They're getting the audiences excited about them and sort of building that anticipation for forthcoming content. And now the photo on the bottom right-hand side. This is a before and after selfie by Robin Riley, who's based in Canada. Now, I will say when I started this research, Instagram was a vastly understudied platform in terms of understanding its potential as a site for radicalization. This photo is a before and after selfie, and Robin writes in the description, "Glow up. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Pick one, under eating, in a bad relationship for 7 years, feeling numb inside, heavy smoker, lost. Pick two, eating healthy, married and pregnant, off all drugs, feeling joy and gratitude for my life, saved." And she writes at the bottom, "These pics were taken 4 years apart, and it didn't happen overnight. You've got to put in the work for the reward. Be patient with yourself. Deprogramming is a long process." Now, on the surface, it doesn't seem like there's anything inherently problematic about this post, until you start to understand the types of coded language that Robin is using to signify her political beliefs. So she uses the term glow up. How many of you here know about the term glow up? Yeah, more than you care to admit, I know. So glow up is a term from the beauty blogging community. It signifies a period of personal transformation to achieve your best self, or your most natural self, inside and out. Here, Robin is hijacking the term glow up as a euphemism for her own radicalization journey. She also uses coded language like deprogramming there at the bottom to signify deprogramming from liberal indoctrination. Altogether, though, the way that this post is written and framed is that it's a story about finding self-confidence. It's a story of self-improvement. And for her, her journey of radicalization is one that is a narrative of authenticity. Altogether, these three examples show how these far-right women influencers are merging their political ideology with their personal lifestyle in ways that seem to be relatable to their audiences. And so here I argue that for far-right activists, they will use influencer practices on social media as a radicalization strategy. In particular, they're very astute about portraying themselves as being relatable, accessible, authentic, and responsive to their followers. But we should remind ourselves this is an audience perception. We don't actually know what the day-to-day reality is for these women. It's what they choose to showcase to their followers. But nonetheless, this strategy can present an opportunity for far-right activists like these women to deliver propaganda on social media towards a legitimizing effect of their political ideology, because it seemed to be quite normal content. Now, when I started writing this book, I quickly termed a whole genre of red pill vlogs, as I called it. How many of you are familiar with red pilling as a term? Okay. For those of you who don't know, red pill comes from the film The Matrix, in which the protagonist is offered to take the blue pill and live a life of ignorance and delusion, or take the red pill and be awakened to the truths of society. And so for the far right, and particularly for the alt-right, when I was studying this movement, being red-pilled was the first step of their radicalization towards beliefs like anti-feminism, anti-liberalism, and conspiracy theories like the Great Replacements, and then during COVID, the Great Reset. On the left-hand side, you'll see a couple of examples of these red pill vlogs. These are often one of the first few videos that you will see on their YouTube channels, like the one on the left, My Red Pill Journey, or the one below that, Origin Story, which to me is an interesting title because it signals a type of rebirth, or reawakening after having been red-pilled. And in their red pill vlogs, these influencers will go really deep into their backgrounds and life histories. So they'll talk about growing up in middle-class families, in middle-class households. They'll describe going to university and then working in urban areas, socializing with friends and colleagues, so quite normal behavior. And then there's a moment in time in which these women will describe feeling deeply depressed and unhappy with their life situation. And it's this moment in time in which these influencers will blame feminism for their unhappiness, because they believe that mainstream society, as controlled by feminists in conspiratorial terms, unnaturally forces women into the public workplace. And so for these influencers, traditionalism becomes the antidote to feminism. But what's quite interesting is after these initial red pill vlogs, these influencers will often create a follow-up video after that, like the ones you see on the right-hand side, with titles like I Lost All My Friends in the Culture War, or below that, Red-Pilled Losing Friends. And here, crying to the webcam, these influencers will describe losing family and friends after having been red-pilled, which is a very common reaction. But they will frame their decision and their political beliefs as something that is worthy and courageous. So they'll say, I'm just finding my most authentic self, my most confident self. And so if I have to lose family and friends, that's the price I have to pay. And thus their narratives of authenticity mask a hateful ideology and movement. When I started off doing this research, I had assumed that most of these influencers would be attempting to recruit and radicalize other women into the movement. But I very quickly found that on YouTube, not on Instagram, and we can discuss why in the Q&A, but on YouTube, they had a disproportionate number of male followers. In fact, one of them said that she looked at her YouTube analytics and 85% of her viewers were male. And so these influencers will purposely create content targeting their male viewers, like the video on the top left with the title, The War on Men, proclaiming that because mainstream society is controlled by feminists, this prohibits men from exercising their, quote, natural biological masculinity traits like aggression, leadership, and dominance. And if young men join the far right, they will be able to exercise those traits and find a submissive wife. Or on the top right-hand side, making videos such as, why are men doomed to be unhappy? Describing the phenomenon of cucks, incels, and simps. Or the video on the bottom left, with the title The Future of Masculinity, talking about phenomenons like passport bros. These are men who purposely seek to marry women outside of Western countries. Passport bros, prenups, and gender. Altogether, creating content that reinforces notions of masculinity in terms of dominance, aggression, and leadership, and supporting that. At other times in this space, coming across a whole plethora of trad accounts on Instagram, such as the photo on the bottom right. This was an account run by the Identitarians in Europe before it was taken down. You can see that photo there of a soldier with the text overlay, "Europe is the new white." I have to admit, I haven't totally figured this out yet, so I'm open to suggestions during the Q&A. But above all, for these far-right women, they do see their primary roles as wives and mothers. And that is very much continuing the legacy of previous far-right movements. But I wanted to understand, how do they showcase that today? And it is through this networked intimacy with their followers in which they frame this maternalist aspiration. The media scholar Ashley Matthias has called this phenomenon alt-maternalism, sort of a play off of alt-right, in which she describes as maternalist logics paired with anti-multiculturalism, white ethno-nationalism, and hate networks. So the top example there is a screenshot from a YouTube channel called Motherland that was founded by these two influencers upon discovering that they were pregnant with their first child. So they created this YouTube channel, and it has quite a lot of stereotypical mommy blogging content. Things like prenatal nutrition, breastfeeding tips, diapering tips, etc. Nothing that seems to be very problematic on the surface. But I remember logging into a 2-hour live stream once, and about halfway through the live stream, one of them was breastfeeding her newborn, and then very quickly started to talk about their duty to reproduce in order to save the white race. So very quickly, in just a blink, you see that they can delve into extreme rhetoric. But again, you wouldn't notice this just by looking at the surface level of this channel. On the bottom left-hand side, this is an Instagram story. And here, Robin writes, "My workspace. I have begun writing a birth prep and intro to motherhood ebook, covering everything from TTC, that means trying to conceive, to breastfeeding. How exciting is that?" She polls her followers, yes or no. Presumably that's her working on that ebook with her newborn son laying next to it. So again, the way that these women are actively involving their followers into the content creation process in ways that seem to be participatory. I also want to take a minute here to play for you the video in the middle. This is a podcast called Culture Apothecary, based in the US, between two Turning Point USA influencers, Alex Clark and Allie Beth Stuckey. And here, Allie Beth is talking about toxic empathy. This is a phrase that she has coined to describe how liberals in the US use this. Well, I'll play for you the video in a second, but sort of how liberals in the US play upon inherent maternalist biological inclinations and weaponize that into support for social justice causes.
Voters and what it truly means to be empathetic could possibly sway the election.
So in short, Ali Beth's argument is that because women have this natural maternalist desire, this is a desire that becomes weaponized by the left to then be empathetic towards those who are in vulnerable or marginalized positions. And then finally, on the right-hand side, the bottom right, this is Robin basically writing on the overlay of this Instagram story saying, "Perverts stop buying babies challenge," meaning that Robin is criticizing this same-sex couple for using a surrogate in order to have a child. So during this time that I was writing this book, there was quite a significant spike in terms of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and especially transphobic rhetoric, because it was seen as a direct threat to the traditional nuclear family. And then perhaps unsurprisingly, during COVID, a significant spike of health and scientific disinformation. But not only such. So one of the long-standing narratives within this space has been a rise of attacks against hormonal birth control and contraception, like the screenshot of the study you see there on the left-hand side, as well as there in the middle, in which Dutch influencer Eva Flaterenbroek writes about the reasons why she distills her tap water, because apparently there is runoff from hormonal birth control pills that is entering into the water supply system. I think interestingly with both of these examples is how these influencers will cherry pick scientific peer-reviewed articles to make their point and to sort of construct this aura of legitimacy for their claims. And then during COVID, quite a lot of disinformation being circulated in this space, particularly around the vaccines and how it supposedly targeted fertility issues as well, such as the study in the middle there, claiming that nearly half of women who took the Pfizer COVID trial vaccine experienced a miscarriage. Now, we don't actually know why these women experienced a miscarriage. It could have been due to a number of reasons, but it was very quickly a time of fear and sort of the weaponization of fear that we started to see headlines like this around moral panics concerning reproductive ability. And then finally, I'll play for you the video on the right. This is from an influencer named Isabel Brown in the US. And this video was released just after the US election, as there has been quite a lot of heightened discourse around abortion rights and future abortion rights in the US. So there are some, of course, very valid criticisms concerning medical establishments and the experiences that women have faced, particularly around underfunded studies concerning their reactions to, say, certain prescriptions. And this type of fear is being weaponized and being then twisted to suit this ideological agenda, and one that is reoriented around certain notions of biological traits and characteristics for men and for women. The one thing I did not expect when I was writing this book was actually how many interesting food recipes that I received, a lot of cooking tips. But this actually became the forefront of trying to understand how so many of these influencers were presenting their content online, such as on the top left, the popularization of this term, Make America Healthy Again, and quite a lot of excitement around the supposed nomination of RFK Jr. As sort of the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. But also this type of discourse became much more subtle and embedded at several times, such as the photo you see there in the middle. So this is a photo of an avocado toast. And here Robin writes, "One of my newest pregnancy-related recipes, wild Alaskan salmon caviar on avocado toast. Salmon caviar is a superfood, and that's putting it mildly. The bioavailability of omega-3 fatty acids, folate, iron, and lean protein found in roe is second to none, making it the perfect pregnancy food, ... She sort of goes on to explain more of the nutritional benefits of eating this dish. Now again, on the surface, it seems like this is just some typical food blogging, and in some ways it is. But if you juxtapose this post along with all of Robin's other content that she creates, the focus on nutrition and prenatal nutrition is a purposeful one, and that is in terms of priming the body for optimal fertility and for reproductive ability through consuming healthy and nutritious food. On the other hand, you see on the right-hand side, this is just an example off of a feed from an influencer. I would describe this as a rather beige aesthetic, and you can see how she is there, joyfully playing with her children, also featuring some of the homemade recipes that she makes, such as granola, as well as tips on how to incorporate bone marrow into your diet, drinking raw milk, etc., interlaced with conspiracy theories of posts like whatever the government says, do the opposite, and trying to provide alternative health and wellness advice to her followers. But in sum, we know that ideals about food, cooking, and nurturing white families have long intersected with gendered understandings of proper roles as wives and mothers within the far right. Again, I wanted to understand how these influencers were manifesting that for today. And because they are influencers, there's a significant amount of entrepreneurial activities that they do engage in. Such as, for example, on the left-hand side, Brittany Zellner's book, Patriots Not Welcome. Again, women in the far right have historically written books. This is nothing new. But books like this are now widely available through global distributors like Amazon, for example. Or next to that, the Substack of Aoife Flattering book, where she writes sort of a weekly newsletter for subscribers. And that is, again, also an income-generating venture to also publicize her intellectual takes on these various issues. Other times we see entrepreneurial activity on the right-hand side through more active consumerism of products. Like in the middle, a photo from Ballerina Farm's store. How many of you here know of Ballerina Farm? Okay. She is perhaps one of the most popular Tradwife influencers on Instagram. I think she has around 9 million followers. So she has her own farm, and through that she sells products on her Ballerina Farm store page. And here features her sourdough kit, which you can purchase. And she says, all sourdough starter is bubbled up right here in my kitchen, then freeze-dried and shipped out in sourdough kits, right? So there's also this type of ethos in terms of being sovereign and sort of being self-sufficient in producing this type of food for your family, and at the same time provides Ballerina Farm an income generation. Or Mrs. Midwest on the right-hand side, a very prominent Tradwife influencer, Off of her blog or her website, there is a Shop My Life section, and there you can click through on her Amazon storefront where you can purchase cooking supplies, beauty and skincare products, and some of her cleaning picks there. So you can literally consume through her identity, or rather you can consume her identity through the purchase and use of these products. And she does receive a small commission through the Amazon affiliate link if you purchase using those links. There are also a number of sponsors for these influencers, mostly those who are ideologically motivated, who sort of fall on the same side of the political spectrum, such as on the left-hand side. This is a clothing company called Forbidden Clothes, art and apparel for the awakened few. You can see a rabbit going down the blue rabbit hole. And then here they sell products with t-shirts, such as a t-shirt showing a photo of a person with a sheep's head, and it says "Government knows best," so proclaiming that all of us are sheeple who are just doing what the government tells us to do. Another t-shirt with the slogan "Tradition is the new rebellion," and there is a nuclear family behind that slogan. Or another one saying "Resist the NWO," the New World Order, alluding to sort of a Jewish occupied government conspiracy theory. And here we see Eva Flaurenboek modeling that t-shirt for her audience. Other sponsors include the one in the middle. So this is a beef liver supplement company, and a beef organ supplement. And here, Robin's followers can get a discount code if they purchase through that link for those supplements. The name of the company is called Higher Health, or HH. And also I have to say, giving this presentation in Germany, it was immediately pointed out to me the meaning behind HH, that symbolism. And then on the right-hand side, a company that sells what it calls feminine products, so that is tampons, pads, menstrual cups, where again, followers can also get a discount code. This company, Garnu, specifically promotes a non-gender inclusive message in its marketing. So it proclaims, for example, that periods are for women only, that only women can menstruate, and is sort of against gender inclusive language in its marketing and sale of goods. So that's why it's a partner for these influencers. And penultimately, I wanted to talk about some of the transnational ties. So I did mention I focused more or less on North American influencers, but there was also some significant interactions that they had in Europe, such as, and I would say these transnational ties, they happen through many different levels of interaction and at different scales and scopes, and some are more formal, some are less formal. But they do occur through many different ways, such as, for example, giving speeches, as Lauren Southern is doing on the left-hand side at Vlaams Belang Jongeren, so the youth wing of Vlaams Belang. Or next to that, just a photo of Brittany at sort of an anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine protest in Vienna, she's showcasing. Or below that, so some of these influencers also create documentaries and showcase them, like the one there at the bottom called Borderless, which was filmed sort of in the aftermath of the refugee crisis in Europe. Other times, these influencers will appear as sort of talk show hosts or other forms of media, like that on the top-hand side. Let's talk about it. So this was a talk show hosted by Eva Flaurenboek, who, after leaving the FVD, very briefly lived in Sweden and was a talk show host for the Sweden Democrats YouTube channel, where she hosted her own talk show for a very brief period of time before returning back to the Netherlands. And then at the bottom right-hand side, So these are two different selfies. So the one on the left from Eva, she writes, "Time for another unvaccinated, chemical sunscreen-free, seed oil disrespecting, sundress-wearing white girl summer." Now I realize this may not make sense to most of you, and that's probably for the best. But here we are seeing how she is spreading quite a multitude of conspiracy theories. For example, unvaccinated is a pretty straightforward one. The second one being chemical sunscreen-free, so also this conspiracy theory that holds that sunscreens are actually toxic for your bodies and do not actually have any effects in preventing UV damage and exposure. Seed oil disrespecting, so that is this other conspiracy theory that is part of the raw food movement. By raw food, I mean raw meat, raw eggs, raw milk. That is also against seed oils, because seed oils are supposedly to contain endocrine disruptors in the supply and manufacturing of them. But then the point being, on the right-hand side, we also see Thais Descoufon there, and she writes, "May this white girl summer begin," right? And these two posts were posted within days of each other, which I found to be quite interesting, because we're also seeing how these transnational connections are being facilitated online, whether it's sort of the hijacking of using slogans or sayings on social media. So it's just another element of many transnational ties. But these influencers do use their positions to promote what I would see, or what I would argue to have been quite extreme talking points, and propelling that into mainstream visibility. For example, on the left-hand side, very recently, or not very recently, I would say this year, Eva gave a talk at CPAC Hungary, in which she very openly discussed the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And she writes, "The full speech I gave at CPAC Hungary, that the establishment is currently losing its absolute mind over. I spoke the forbidden truth. The Great Replacement is no longer a theory, it's reality. White Europeans are being replaced in their own countries at an ever-accelerating rate. And it will mean the end of our civilization as we know it if we don't turn things around." It was also at CPAC Hungary where she met, I believe, again, with Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, and saying, "Thank you for being one of the very few sane leaders left in Europe, and thank you for your tireless defense of Christian values, national sovereignty, and freedom." Now, supposedly, this speech that she gave at CPAC Hungary had received over 44 million views in 2 days on Twitter. But it was in 2017 in which Lauren Southern, on the right-hand side, was also talking about the Great Replacement. And it was seen to be a rather fringe talking point at that time, and indeed it led to things like her being banned from entry to several countries because of that type of discourse. But after Eva's speech, we saw quite a lot of positive reactions from other influencers in this space. So on the right-hand side, a video by Lauren where she says the speech that changed the internet, saying, Eva, she finally was able to bring up this quote reality into such prominence and public visibility. And another reaction video below that from Lauren Chen saying Lauren Southern was right. She was right about the Great Replacement almost 10 years ago. And so the way that I see it is that these influencers are very adept at taking very extreme narratives, discourse, and then bringing it to prominence within mainstream conservative spaces, not least within public discourse more broadly. But this type of transnational connection, it also happens at an informal level as well. Such as on the left-hand side, we see a couple of interviews that Brittany has hosted on her channel with Eva Fladenbroek and with Thais Descoufon. And these are very casual, get-to-know-you format interviews. So they're questions like, what got you interested in politics? What has been your experience with political activism? Have you made a lot of friends within this movement? And it's just a way for an audience to casually know and understand these women in a very holistic way. But of course, when these influencers do meet in person, they have to take selfies and post it on their pages, such as in the middle there. There's Brittany Zellner with Eva Vlaardingbok and Reisha Blomstein. And Brittany says, "You're both an inspiration. So lovely to meet you." To which Eva replies, "The pleasure was all ours. Thank you for your kindness and all the important work you do." Or the example next to that with Brittany meeting with Thijs de Scoufon at a ball night at the Holberg Palace in Vienna. And so to me, this signaled a type of transnational sisterhood that these women were trying to represent to their followers, because they're telling young women, if you join us, you'll find like-minded women like ourselves, and you'll find this sisterhood that is a globally spanning one. And so I wanted to end by talking about some of the measures to counter the far right online. Now, when we think about countering the far right online, we often focus on content moderation, and that is a set of practices that rely on technical tools that platforms will use. And I call this the 4 Ds of content moderation. So the first is deplatforming. That is banning an account or a user from a platform. Suspension would be, say, a temporary form of deplatforming, not a permanent one. The second D is demonetization. So that'd be sort of restricting the financial avenues. So that could be, for example, restricting advertising revenue from YouTube videos, or restricting the use of sponsors or paid product advertising. The third would be deranking. And that refers to restricting the visibility in search results. So if you were to search for an influencer, maybe for a specific video, it may not come up in the initial page or two in the search results. And then the last D of content moderation is detection. And that would be using either human or machine learning to be able to detect violative content and then take action accordingly. And that is the most difficult tool of content moderation. Now, it goes without saying that these influencers are very well aware of these measures that have been implemented and have been trying to find ways to circumvent them. The Instagram story on the left from Robin Riley, she writes, "The ways in which the Kufer jab," that's the COVID vaccine, "could affect female and male fertility. This is all a plan to reduce the population via widespread sterilization." So actually promoting both scientific disinformation as well as great replacement narrative talking points. And Robin writes, Bill Gates is spearheading the push for mandatory vaccination. Now, she is deliberately manipulating the characters for vaccination there. So she's using numbers, symbols, in order to manipulate that spelling. Now, some of you might remember that during the pandemic, Instagram introduced a feature on posts containing words like COVID, vaccination, corona, and a pop-up banner would appear on posts that would direct users to the World Health Organization's official page about COVID. Now, very early on, these influencers spotted that, and so they were finding creative ways to circumvent the moderation of their content. On the other hand, you have instances like on the right-hand side. So the initial post by Robin was actually featuring a vacuum that she had purchased to use for household cleaning. Now, for some reason, we don't know why, Instagram flagged that post, assuming that it actually contained the word vaccine instead of vacuum. And so Robin writes, "Dane, the algorithm is paranoid. It thinks any word that starts with V as a dog whistle for jabs, LMAO." Now, the truth is, we don't actually know why this initial post was flagged. Was it because Robin had previously been flagged for spreading scientific disinformation about COVID, so that she was already on Instagram's radar? Or was it simply a false positive that was generated out of automated machine learning that detected this content? And that is actually a bigger issue. We just don't have any transparency about the process that led to the flagging of this post. But there is a much more problematic issue at play, which is, I would say, a significant gender blind spot when it comes to content moderation, as well as issues of cross-platform posting. So on the left-hand side, you see a selfie with Brittany and her husband, Martin Zellner, and she puts the Austrian flag emoji over his face. And the reason is because Brittany is not allowed to show photos of her husband's face on Instagram. She did face a 3-month suspension for doing so, and now does things like covers his face with an emoji. But she posts the exact same photo on her Telegram account, unfiltered, undoctored. So there is a cross-platform posting dilemma here at play, but there is also a significant gender blind spot. Like her husband, Brittany has faced legal prosecution, has been denied entry at country borders for her activism, but has not suffered the same consequences for her social media activity. And in large part, it's because, unlike her husband, who directly incites violence and who has been banned from almost every platform imaginable, except X, he's now bought a premium account on X. Brittany is very good at skirting the borderline in terms of the framing of her content, so it's not a direct incitement to violence, even though it insinuates as such. And because of that, she is not seen to violate these platforms' community guidelines. But I do think that there's a very strong argument to be made for the role of counter-influencers in this space. So these are creators who will debunk or demystify a lot of far-right talking points. Like, for example, Frau Lorenz there on the left-hand side. Here she has a series in which she says, or they say, you've probably seen Nazi symbols on social media before without even realizing it. So she breaks down a lot of those symbols. Or Abby Richards in the middle, whose TikTok sort of discusses a lot of disinformation as well as conspiracy theories to educate her followers. Or on the right-hand side, Ashley Taylor, who makes a lot of satirical content about Tradwives, sort of pointing out quite a lot of the hypocrisy of their content. We should, of course, exercise caution when we think about the role of counter-influencers in this space. For instance, what is their motivation for creating this content to begin with? What are the particular ideologies that they hold? What are the strategies to actually incorporate them in ways effectively and productively in terms of the type of audience that you're trying to reach? And then what are the potential risks if you are to potentially involve them, say in like a campaign? And overall, some of the research that's just emerging from this shows that for counter-influencers, it is so crucial that they maintain their credibility with their audiences. That is, you still provide them full control over the creative process in such a way that it doesn't deflect from their audiences, and they are still seen as authentic in what they create. So to wrap it up, so through this, I have shown how far-right activists are using influencer practices and networked intimacy techniques as effective recruitment, radicalization, and propaganda strategies. But these influencers, they're posting what we would consider to be broadly apolitical lifestyle content. So they're posting about self-help or self-improvement. They're posting food vlogging or providing health and wellness advice. And they are purposely posting this type of lifestyle content to relate and appeal to broad audiences. At the same time, these influencers are using quite a lot of coded language within that lifestyle content to then advance their far-right ideology as a form of communication, and they're benefiting from algorithms and the visibility because they know what lands in terms of what's salient. And finally, just to repeat myself from the beginning, overall, we see that the propaganda and marketing of far-right women plays a key function within this movement today. And that is normalizing and legitimizing far-right ideology for mainstream appeal. So that's it, and I look forward to your questions.